Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone to Hot Takes with Billy Biz, the show that is exactly what the title is. There's literally no guessing as to what you're going to get in this episode. The show's now on iTunes after going back and forth with Apple support for a good couple days, which means it's by association the transitive property. It's also on Downcast, Stitcher, Spotify, a whole bunch of other adjectives and verbs and nouns that I've never heard of that you guys use to get your podcast. But it's all there now. So if you're on iTunes, please subscribe. Please rate it. Please review it, because that means people will see it more if it's rated and reviewed. So today we're going to be talking about 2008's Speed Racer. And like any good show, I'm mixing up the format 3 episodes in. Just as soon as maybe you got used to how this show's going to work, we're going to change it up a little bit. Usually, I bring in a guest who has a different opinion than my own about the movie we're talking about. But for this episode, I want to talk with another superfan about why this movie, Speed Racer, was kind of overlooked and misunderstood in its time, and why it has the cult following it has now. So, joining me is none other, Honest Trailers writer, stand-up comedian, a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and painting figures things that I know you do, Mr. Joe Starr.
Yes, let's talk Speed Racer.
Let's talk Speed Racer.
I love this movie.
Of course, it's not going to really apply so much to this episode, but I always like to give a little disclaimer that this is not a game show. This is not movie fights. We're not trying to win points here. We are bringing back the old nerdy discourse.
I don't know how to talk about a film if we're not
putting
just a competition around it.
Only speaking in hyperbole.
Yeah, God, I mean that just. I don't know what to do.
Well, before we get into Speed Racer, let's give a little bit of context about Speed Racer, because I feel like more so than almost any other movie that I've talked about so far with Ant-Man and Batman Forever, and what I will be talking about, context really plays a part in this one. Mm-hmm. So this is the summer of 2008, and this has become a legendary summer. This was about as packed as you could possibly get for summer blockbusters. I'm gonna name some of them. This was all within the same May to about end of August span. Iron Man, Indiana Jones 4, Dark Knight, Mamma Mia, Hancock, Tropic Thunder, Incredible Hulk, WALL-E, Step Brothers, Wanted, Get Smart, Narnia 2, Sex and the City, Kung Fu Panda, Hellboy, Mummy 3, all in the same summer.
That's
packed... all in the same summer. That
Jesus,
is
I didn't
insane.
really even remember that.
Yeah, this was, I
always forget that Hulk came out like a week after Iron Man.
It was
not like a week, but
yeah,
you know,
but
like
it was, you could go see Iron Man and then literally walk across the hall and go see Speed Racer. So I just named off a ton of movies. And while there were varying degrees of success for all of them, I mean, you know, you have Hellboy 2, which was not quite up to the standards of its predecessor in terms of box office, or like Prince Caspian, which bombed. You also had like Sex and the City, Dark Knight, obviously. But none of them came and went faster and with more of a thud than the Wachowski Speed Racer. So this was based on the 60s Japanese anime series of the same name. The movie severely underperformed at the box office.
Yes.
Brought in only $93 million worldwide off a $120 million budget.
To bring some context to that, I used to work at Warner Brothers and on the distribution side, and I would make it a joke in any kind of staff meeting I was in to find a way to bring up Speed Racer, and just no one had forgiven it yet. So
just bring the entire room down.
The wound was still very fresh, and people would just be like.
And then the next year it would be Watchmen.
Don't say the S word.
Yeah, so this was the first casualty, really, of that crowded summer blockbuster season. Now, as time went on, the film became somewhat of a cult favorite, but let's be real here. Emile Hirsch never headlined a blockbuster after this again.
No.
And a lot of the goodwill that the Wachowskis had coming off of Matrix and then started to cool a little bit with the sequels, now it was kind of almost gone with this movie. That being said, from where I sit, and I appreciate and I acknowledge, and I'm by no means belittling the breakthroughs that the Matrix achieved. I think that Speed Racer is actually their finest piece of work that the Wachowskis have ever accomplished.
I agree on. I think it's their best movie. I think Sense8. Have you seen Sense8 on Netflix?
I have not watched Sense8, so I guess I'll put a little asterisk. Next to...
I think Sense8 is.
But still, this is cinema.
But yeah, for movies, absolutely. I think this is easily their best movie.
So I want to ask you: do you remember the first time you watched this? Did you see it in theaters? Do you remember?
No. So I bought this because we just got our first, like quote unquote, big widescreen TV, and like our first
40-inch.
Yeah, 35. Like your first Blu-ray player and your first like TV. We had
It only takes 10 minutes to load a movie.
Yeah. Oh man. We gotten our tax return. It was like my first like good tax return. Where you're like, oh my god. And so we splurged a little bit.
Ooh.
And we got the TV and we got a Blu-ray, and I bought Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Great movie.
Which is super funny, super underrated comedy, and Speed Racer, because I was like, I feel like with this new TV that's going to be the most dynamic looking, colorful television that you'll ever buy, like that's probably a movie we want to like watch and just be dazzled by. So that's the first time I saw Speed Racer. I guess it had been on Blu-ray for a little bit at that point, and I always sort of been curious about it, especially because people just hated it.
I feel like more than hated it, this movie, like, at least for the first year, you're like talking about your favorite movies of the year. It's like, oh, and Speed Racer, like, what was that?
I think it befuddled people. It either wasn't on their radar because they didn't care, which I can't fault you for not caring about Speed Racer, Did
you know the cartoon or the anime at all?
I mean,
it
existed.
Exactly,
I knew the song. I knew Trixie. I knew that there was a kid, a little brother, and a monkey, and that he drove a mock car. Like very like basic things,
Sure.
but like I never watched it. Like I didn't have an emotional connection to it. So like I can forgive you not being excited about Speed Racer in the way that like I bet people were probably really pumped when they heard there was going to be a Dragon Ball movie, because like Dragon Ball is an anime that like connected so much more with like our generation and folks a little like younger than us.
Right. I remember, so I went opening night to this movie, and we went and we saw it. If you're a SoCal native, there's the Irvine Spectrum, and the Irvine Spectrum is one of the last remaining real IMAX theaters, the ones that's like 70 millimeter.
They don't just have the brand on it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like literally huge,
Cool.
dizzying. And it was probably one of my favorite film going experiences. I think I've talked about this.
Amazing to see.
Yeah,
on
we
the
were
screen like
smack
that.
dab in the middle of an IMAX theater, and it was a sold out crowd.
I can't even fathom that.
Probably the only time that movie had a sold out crowd, by the way.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think I've talked about this on Screen Junkies before, but it was one of my favorite film going experiences because I had some guy, maybe a row ahead of me. This was the greatest movie he had ever seen in his life. He was like, oh!
What?
And so at the very end of the movie, I guess spoilers for Speed Racer. I don't know why you're listening to this if you haven't watched it. This would be really boring. But when Speed's going so fast that it turns into checkered kaleidoscope, he's just like, Jills! In front of and everyone's just like applauding and going crazy, and it added to the movie so much. So I walked out of there just on cloud nine. I was like, people are going to go nuts for this thing. I've never seen something like this before. And it just dropped like a fart in church, man. No one talked about it.
Yeah. Side note, my best movie-going experience, weirdly, was my buddy Sammy and I went to go see Rocky Balboa. And, like, it was all just dudes in the audience that had, like, gotten the night off from, like, girlfriends or whatever. Yeah. And I don't know what it is about Rocky, but, like, when they show the computer simulation of Rocky fighting that current champ, like everyone was already like, get him, Rock, and like by the end of the movie, like strangers were just high-fiving, and like
Yes!
I hugged a dude. Like it was, I was like, that was amazing.
It's like a sporting event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. I think crowd participation sometimes can really enhance a bad movie.
Yeah.
Or even like make a good movie just stand out even more.
That's why I will always love Can't Hardly Wait. Because when we saw that in the theater, I saw it with a big group of friends, and the whole theater was like singing along to the songs, and like standing up and clapping for Paradise City when the kids Can't Hardly Wait's fine. Like it's a perfectly good teen movie. It's not the best of all time or anything like that, but that movie experience like pushed it over the edge.
So once I saw this in IMAX, I actually brought 2 more people on 2 separate occasions to go see it again. So I saw this 3 times in IMAX each time.
That's awesome.
So my memories of
so
Speed
awesome.
Racer are just bigger, larger than life. So I have a couple points here I want to talk about. This episode is going to be, if you haven't watched Speed Racer, why you need to watch this, even though I just slapped you on the wrist saying, why are you listening to this if you haven't watched it? But if you're still with me, we're going to sell you on this movie. And then if you don't like it, because there are people that really don't like this movie that saw it, I get it. I want to tell you where we're coming from. And I think point 1, first and foremost, especially think about the time that we're in, 2008. We're in the time of really gritty, cynical films, because I think that's kind of where we are. This is just a great family movie. Like they're really hard these days to have a family movie that either doesn't pander too much to the kids, or you go see it and you're like, this is for kids? Like there's some stuff in here. I don't know how I feel about it.
It strikes a really, really good balance.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the least cynical movies I've ever seen, which is funny because it's all about like the cynicism of tycoons and kind of like capitalism, but every member of this family unironically loves and respects each other, which I can't think of a movie in the last 10 years.
Well, that's this cast is really elevates it, because John Goodman is able to, in between 2 scenes, do a comedy scene where he's throwing ninjas in a hotel room
with one of the worst lines ever, which was like, was that a ninja? More like a nanja.
Yeah, more like a nanja. Yeah, but then immediately, like in the next scene, just be like this warm, loving father that you like connect to immediately. And Sarandon's the same way in this. Like
you feel their grief for Rex, which I feel like these actors, and I have to give this to the directing of the Wachowskis, they take it serious enough that you believe the emotions are real, but they don't take it so seriously that the silly moments feel out of place, which is a really hard balance to do.
Yeah. Well, I think the Wachowskis understand that what makes a really, really good piece of children's programming is something that doesn't insult a kid's intelligence, breaks down more complex ideas in a broad way that they can understand, but also like keeps things so like there's an emotional grounding for kids. Like when Bambi's mom. Today, I feel like a lot of movies, like as soon as Bambi's mom gets shot, like 15 minions would like just get dropped onto the screen to be like, "Don't feel feelings." And so I think they get that, and that was sort of the mindset in crafting this. Was that it was like it needs an emotional grounding because kids can relate to very like broad, simple emotions. Whether it's, just the excitement of the big company, but then realizing that, greed is bad and family is important, stuff like that. So I think they did like a really great job of really grounding it in broad emotion that like kids can latch onto, that also gives like enough story for older people.
Yeah, I think,
to enjoy too.
One of the criticisms going back to like the Phantom Menace, I think that's a movie where you're not sure who that's made for, because they have the you know, Jar Jar farts moments, but then like the stuff with the politics, like I had to look up what, like, you know, blockades were. Like, I don't, these politics, like, they're interesting to me as an adult, but as a kid, it's like, no more Senate stuff. Where this movie toes that line between like, here's, you know, corporate greed and like real trade laws and how they can skirt around stuff, but also
here's a monkey
throwing his poop. You know,
and I think Phantom Menace is actually a really good movie to compare this to. That's really smart, because that's a movie where a kid's like realizing that his price for being free from slavery is never seeing his mom again, but then instantly, like, Jar Jar Binks like puts his like dick in a blender and is like, oh, these, and it doesn't work. It never gives anything. I guess that's what he'd yell if his dick was in a blender, but like never gives any of that like time to breathe. Right. I wonder if Jar Jar might have worked if they just gave moments like time to breathe in that movie. Because Speed Racer, they give the family that moment of real grief, and then we're back to the racetrack where we're in this intense race against like Viking themed racers and stuff like that. We're back to it.
And I think too, part of it is, it's weird. I was not planning on making this an apples oranges comparison to Phantom Menace, but one part of it is Jar Jar. They tried to inject some humanity, but kept undercutting it. Whereas Spritle and Chim Chim, I will admit there are times where it's a little much. Then again, I'm not 8 years old, so it's probably perfect. But they let Spritle also have real feelings, which. There's a scene towards the climax of the film where Speed's about to leave home, and it beautifully mirrors Rex leaving home. And he does the "can I come with you?" and he's like, "You're not going to understand until it's your turn to do this too." And I feel like that kid, you know, they kind of let him go nuts for the rest of the movie, but they really reined him in. So you really felt like this kid is losing his hero just like Speed does. Yeah. And like you can kind of see the pathos forming, which is like very strange that you're thinking of like the pathos for this kid that 2 scenes earlier was, you know, like
doing the candy montage and stuff like that. Yeah. Which is still just a fun like visual of a scene, and serves a good narrative purpose too, where it's like it's part of, again, this company like just trying to blind this family. So they're like, I don't, you know, here, look at all this stuff we've got.
And he gives the guy a middle finger. That's the only part of this movie I'm like, all right, maybe the not family friendly, but it's like the only non-family friendly thing that happens in this entire movie.
Yeah, so Spritle's like a hard character to crack, I think, for something like this. And in general, I think like precocious kids are a hard thing to figure out. And I think this movie does it pretty well. Like there's a good balance. Like you say, like every now and then you're kind of like, okay, I'm good. But like they skirt that edge, but I don't think they ever like fall over it completely. Like, whereas I think Incredibles 2, really thought just Jack Jack was the runaway hit of this movie, and really they just went, what was the Green Martian and Flintstones, the Great Gazoo, like
Gazoo,
yeah, like Jack Jack is like full Gazoo in Incredibles 2, like anytime
never go full Gazoo.
They never go full Gazoo, and like anytime Incredibles 2 starts to get back to like, okay, here's like our core message, here's Jack Jack's got to roll in and like shoot an electricity fart or shoot or turn invisible again or turn into a monster or something, and it's like they just got the balance wrong, which was really surprising for a Pixar movie. But whereas I think Speed Racer like got the balance pretty well, because you have to have them.
Yeah,
they're
of course,
a key part of the cartoon.
I think it's kind of like there's a time for work and there's a time for play. And I feel like this movie does it perfectly.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's why you buy into a lot of it. You know, one of the things that I really love about this movie is this family is so passionate about racing. And it's not necessarily the passion for racing, but this idea that passion and drive is more important than skill or money or buying your way in. Like, I love that line from Racer X where he says, you don't climb into a T800 to be a driver. You do it because you're driven. And I feel like that's a message that, especially for people that want to be in the entertainment industry, I feel like a lot of times, you know, you say like, I want to be an actor, I want to be a writer, and there'll always be someone who rolls their eyes. But I've seen it myself where it's like, I've seen really talented people who just don't book anything because they're like, I'm the best, so why am I not booking? And I've seen people that are really good, maybe not the best, but really good, but they are driven so hard and they succeed. Yeah. And I feel like that's a message that's in this movie. This, like, you don't do it because you want to be rich. You don't do it because you want to be a famous driver. You do it because you have to, because that's in your blood.
And it's about the journey is a really like complex message to deliver to a little kid. Right. And I applaud the movie for doing it. That's a deep message. Like, I think a kid can handle the fairy tale message of that they wrapped around, you know, sort of the corporate greed versus family passion. But then, like, taking it a step deeper and things like, you know, man, it's not about the goal. It's about, you know, the steps you took to get there. Like that. I don't see a 10-year-old kid like easily being able to wrap their head around it. But that's the beauty, I think, of Speed Racer, is that there's enough to that movie where that 10-year-old kid's going to watch it again when they're 12. They're going to watch it again when they're 14. They're going to watch it again when they're 16. They're probably going to watch it again when they're like 32. And eventually they're going to look back and start and pick up more and more and more from the movie. I'm not saying it's Socrates. Like, I'm not saying, but it has like really like sort of fun levels that depending on your maturity as you watch the movie you'll pick up on and enjoy.
I just finished rewatching this before we did this, like literally minutes, and I was watching that climactic final race lap where Speed is just he's been down and out and now he's going for it, and I'm sure I subconsciously knew it all this time, but I was like, why is this moment just so, like, I'm sitting and wanting to jump out of my desk chair, you know? And I realized what a brilliant move and really risky move. If you go back and watch that final, you know, 45-second stretch of that race, they play it almost all in close-ups and it's not close-ups of you know, Speed, you know, looking like, am I going to win this? I'm going to win this. It's played in close-ups of Speed coming to terms with, like, my brother is gone, but this is what he would have wanted me to do. They play it with flashbacks. When you cut back to see the race, it's only for a second or two that you really see action. It's all emotion. It's all the music. It's all of the facial expressions.
Which is why, which is why I think people who dismiss this as a big, like, crazy CGI like Candy Factory, like, completely miss the point, because to spend as much as they did on this, like, crazy CG world, and to stay anchored on things like that, and just to stay, like, close on Emile Hirsch, when, like, any studio note, I promise you, was like, why aren't we seeing, like, Jack in the Boxes exploding out of mountains and all this, like, weird Mario Kart shit
in the final moments of their final climax,
in this big like climactic race? We should see big climactic race stuff, right, guys? You know, it's the, you know, not to, let me figure out a different movie instead of just dogging on the prequels, where it's like, here's stuff. Avatar is the same way, you know, it's just like pure respect. It's like, here's stuff. And,
I mean, even a lot of beloved superhero third acts.
You know what? Yeah, you're right. The MCU, like, just here's Age of Ultron, here's stuff. Even Infinity War, and, you know, in a lot of places was just like, I don't know, man, here's just stuff. You know, the Thanos fight really works on Titan, because I think they play that similarly, where it's mostly about character.
If you haven't seen Speed Racer, I would liken this last 30 seconds to that slow motion when Scarlet Witch is trying to destroy Vision's stone and everyone's attacking Thanos in slow motion, and he kind of dispatches them, and you see Cap, his close-up of his face as he stops the hand, and it's all played for their reactions, not the action.
Yeah.
That's what Speed Racer is doing, and I think, to your point, I think that's why some of the stuff in the second act, the whole Casa Cristo race, all the big races with all of the crazy, zany, Mario Kart spectacle is there, because once you get to the end, they're not going to give it to you in the way that you expect. But by that point, if you've bought into this world, like that last 45 seconds of that race is so emotional because you've been on this journey with them. You're right. I 100% see those notes of like, why are we on Emil Hirsch contemplating?
Now, that said, on the other end of like the emotional grounding is like the fact that this is like an insane, like cotton candy, like Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory of a visual of a movie. But it's not just like, here's a bunch of crap. Like, here's just like stuff to look at where, it's not like an Emoji Movie or, stuff that's just like, I don't know, here's just visual like sugar. It's the difference between here's just like processed like crap that we're just going to like, here's like a Halloween bowl of just sugar and just take it. And the difference between that and like a master baker, like putting together this like very complicated, like multi-tiered dessert.
Right.
Because it's not just like with it. Yeah, it's flashy and it's colorful, but everything is so like beautifully realized and individualized in everything. It's not just like here's a 1,000 like crazy cars and some of them are different colors and stuff like that. Like you can tell like they all have their own story, they all have their own history. I mentioned like the Viking driver earlier in the opening race. There's all these other like teams and like themed teams, which for us goes back to like early 90s wrestling, where it's this wrestler is also a race car driver. This wrestler is a barber.
And he's a garbage man.
Yeah, this wrestler is a garbage man, and this one plays hockey. Everyone and everything has such a distinct, just amazing look. The art department, I just don't understand how you could go through this movie and be like, because it's just gorgeously realized and just layer on layer of it. Because first you have this artificial world that is their real world. And then like the first moment that like young Speed has a dream sequence when he's in class and his desk like slowly turns into the race car is gorgeous. Like it's beautifully, beautifully done. So it's not just like manufactured like candy and noise. It's like master crafted. This is a dessert that you will eat once in your lifetime because it cost $300 and you had to wait 6 months to be able to get a reservation.
This is quite literally, I've never seen it done before this, and I haven't seen it done after, a cartoon anime come to life. Not just in the realization of the sets, but also the way that like the editing is done, the wipes, the way they tell the flashback stories. It's very kinetic. Everything moves. You're focused on one person's close-up as it moves across the frame to take you to another section of the movie. Like
they're almost like doing laps around you. Like
it's very. Here's the thing, and going back to what I said at the very beginning of this episode, where The Matrix had CGI and visual effects breakthroughs that all of us were kind of stunned at the time. But what The Matrix does that this movie doesn't do, which I think sets this movie apart, is The Matrix didn't just start. The Warner Brothers logo didn't disappear and then you see Trinity doing a backbend bullet time with things around here. They start you off a little bit familiar. Sure, she does a kick, and hangs in midair. There's a pinch here, a pinch there, and then they go a little bit more crazy as the movie goes on. Speed Racer, they drop you into this world right away. There's nothing in your universe that looks like this, so let's not pussyfoot around it. Let's get you right into it. So from the get-go, it has a distinct look and feel that it shouldn't look realistic. When people are like, ugh, CGI, I'm like, it shouldn't look like anything that I should be able to walk down the street and see.
This movie, like, and here's the thing about it too, is that it's, and I always feel silly, like, waxing poetic about Speed Racer, of all things. But this movie's art. Like, it's an adaptation in every sense of the word. Whereas I feel like most IP retreads are just farted out. You know, Ghost in the Shell was just kind of farted out. Marvel is a very entertaining factory line, but it's still a factory line. Like, sure. I still pretty much know, like, what I'm gonna get from an MCU movie, and maybe there are surprises here and there, and that's great. And again, I'm not dogging. I watch all of them, and I like all of them. But again, like, Disney movies, feel a certain way. I think jury's out on Alita Battle Angel. Like, I've seen 15 minutes of it, and we'll see. I don't think people will respond well to Alita, because I feel like it takes a lot of the same visual risks that Speed Racer does, and I think people will, even when the trailer for that came out and the girl has the big weird eyes, and people were like, "What's up with the weird eyes?" Meh. So I think people will probably react similarly to the way they reacted to Speed Racer visually, but Speed Racer took something which most adaptations would either try to ground in reality or just make bland, and the Wachowskis took the opportunity to take a property and go beyond just like, we put the property on screen and we hit your bingo card of like references that you needed and stuff like that. It's not just a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent said the name Stephen Strange and then like looked at the camera. Like, they took
I'm going to cause carnage.
Yeah, oh God. So like, they really took the opportunity to, with an adaptation, to not just adapt the Speed Racer IP, but like try to adapt what that show with like its limited animation capabilities was actually trying to capture. They really tried to tackle the idea of what does a real cartoon look like? What does a cartoon come to life actually look like? How does the concept of racing affect how we tell a story visually, affect how it paces it? Because like you say with the flashbacks, like everything feels like the Indy 500. Everything feels like it's moving and it's racing, and there are even moments that like clearly just feel like pit stops.
Right. There are very few moments where the camera's not actually moving. It's usually with scenes with his mother or father, like a serious talking on the bed scene. There's a couple of those.
Sure.
But other than that, the camera, even if it's ever so slightly, is always in motion. Mm-hmm. It's moving the story ahead. I do want to shout out, by the way, just quick, because I don't know if it's ever going to get in here, Roger Allam as Royalton, maybe one of my favorite on-screen villains, because he knows exactly what movie he's in. And he just he treads that fine line of going to the Fish Mooney, Gotham, Jada Pinkett thing, where I'm just like, all right, tone it down.
Dial it back.
This guy, you won't race, you won't even place, you won't finish it. The Grand Prix.
Yeah, he's the Grand Prix.
The Grand Prix.
He's so good, and I mean this is the greatest compliment, even though it's sort of a backhanded compliment. The first time I saw this afterwards, I was like, how good was Tim Curry? and everyone was like, that was not Tim Curry. But to me, like that, like Tim Curry's great, is perfect at that kind of thing, about being like, I know exactly which movie I'm in, and I know exactly what notes I need to hit to knock the kind of movie that I'm in, like, out of the park, whether it's Clue or whether it's National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1. Like, Tim Curry knows exactly what needs to be done. He knows all the right moves. He's like this weird tactician almost, being like, okay, what are like the strongest genre choices I can make for this to support this and make everybody look great? And he did the same thing, which is, and I guess he looked vaguely Tim Curry-ish.
He does.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah. He's absolutely amazing as the bad guy.
And one last thing that I really want to point out to you, listeners, is that when you have a movie that looks like Speed Racer looks, the temptation is there to put on, I would think, some sort of techno background music and really amp up the or racing. Michael, is it gynecologist Cappuccino?
He did
Michael Giacchino. I have no idea how to say his name.
He composed Rogue One. He
did Lost, the TV series. But I think this is one of the finest musical scores that is out there. If you have the soundtrack or it's on Spotify,
I need to give it a re-listen.
Let Us Drink Milk is the music that's the track name that plays over the last race. And it plays over the reveal of who Rex Racer or Racer X is. And it's such a beautiful piece of music that captures that tone of that moment, that it can take something that's pretty silly on paper, the concept, and really make it feel like, oh my God, this is like moving. And the score of the whole movie is very whimsical, but it fits. It's a cartoon, and they didn't go techno. They kept it cartoon.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Because it was the cartoon come to life. So like what music best serves like the racing cartoon come to life? What like fully realizes that vision? Another thing I love is, you like you say, you have the reveal that he's Rex. But the movie doesn't do any of that in a cynical way of like, next time, baby. Like,
right, exactly.
Can't wait for Speed Racer 2.
Cruise Control.
Cruise Control. They do it in a way that just suggests that there are further adventures for this family and that this isn't it. As like an organic part. Like they don't try to like set it up for a franchise or anything like that.
And I don't feel cheated in a way that I won't ever get a sequel. In that terms, like I walk away from Speed Racer like I feel complete, which is very tough to do because you have to assume that they thought this was going to be a huge moneymaker. There'd be 10 more Speed Racers, but they wisely didn't, dangle any
think
threads.
Emile Hirsch was like signed for several.
I feel like you don't make any movie these days without signing for 10 sequels.
And that was in the early days of it, but like I think after Matrix they were like, oh, surefire.
Yeah. It just didn't happen.
Yeah. I think overall with the Wachowskis, like Jupiter Ascending is so dumb, but like they went there, and I will always defend Jupiter Ascending because as goofy as it is, and as many times as like swinging for the fences like makes like hits a foul ball, like they keep swinging for the fences, and they always do that with projects, and I just there aren't enough creators like that.
Oh, that's gonna have to be a hot takes with Joe Starr.
I mean, Jupiter Ascending is a weird one. Like, I don't like it, but I will, if it's on, I will sit and watch Jupiter Ascending.
I don't like it, but I gladly defend your right to watch it, sir.
Just to see Sean Bean say that bees recognize royalty, and for weird animal people to, that movie's insane.
Now, part of my show is I have to be fair because I don't think that, with very few exceptions, that any movie is perfect or any movie is unredeemable. So this is my concessions, things that I would agree with the general populace that yes, okay. I'll give that. Let's circle back to something we were actually talking about. I do think that Spritle and Chim Chim, there are some moments that just don't work, and they go. The one that really irks me, like if I could only remove one, it's Speed it's at the very end of the movie. He's about to kiss Trixie, and they pause the movie, and it's like this, and he's dressed as a doctor. He's like, this scene might give you cooties. I'm like, okay, just let me have this. Let me have this one moment. Like you were doing so good. So I will agree that. Every now, like it's not to the point where it's like Jar Jar, where I want to just like claw my eyes out, but I do feel like they want.
I think they thought that kid was going to be huge too, because all the behind the scenes stuff for Speed Racer is like hosted by him and stuff like that. So I think they really thought too, like this is going to launch this kid, and he's going to be our whatever our version.
He wasn't a bad kid actor.
No, he's great. They just, I think, yeah, there are those feelings where it starts to feel a little less like these are good movie choices and more like the Wachowskis made a concession that because the studio was like, we need a little more because he's going to be huge and kids are going to love him.
Here's another thing that probably was a studio note that they ignored that I might have looked into a little bit more. This movie is 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
Yeah, it is.
It's a little snug fitting in that runtime. I think there are moments that, look, as a fan of this movie, I do enjoy, but when you're, especially where we are now, I was trying to fit this into my schedule to rewatch, and it's like I actually had to break this up into a couple days because it's like it can be a little self-indulgent.
I tried to rewatch it for you this week, so it'd be a little fresher, and I was like, nope, I can't do it.
It's a little self-indulgent. You could probably. I'm not saying you have to slash it down to 90 minutes, but there's a good 15, 20 minutes you could take out of this.
I agree. Like for pacing of the film itself, I always found myself disagreeing when people are like, this is too long for kids. Because I've sat down to watch stuff with kids before. And like my nieces and nephews and stuff, they don't even care if they sat down for the beginning, middle, or end of a thing. They just sit down and start watching the thing. So like that never really bothered me that much. But the kid argument of it. But I do agree with you, like just as like purely watching the movie and being like, okay, this could have gone, the pace could have tightened up there. I totally agree with you.
You could just, righty-tighty a little bit of
also,
some of it.
If you try to watch this movie high, it's too long. It starts
sensory overload.
Yeah, there's too much. Like maybe if it was like a good like tight 90 minutes, like that's enough. But like it starts to get really overwhelming.
Especially the end when he's just like really going for it and it turns into like a kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
You're just
right around the time like Rain really shows up and starts like doing stuff. You're like, oh, what am I even watching?
I want off. And lastly, I've seen this criticism a lot. I saw it a lot when looking at the Rotten Tomatoes score, which by the way, this got 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is kind of a bummer.
That is.
But I will agree with this criticism in terms of it exists, but it doesn't bother me. Narratively speaking, this movie has great characters, but it's not really character driven. It's really plot based, and it can get dense where it's like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. A lot of stuff happens to Speed as opposed to Speed kind of, no pun intended, driving the narrative.
Yeah. There's a lot of and then this instead of because of this.
Right. Then this.
Yeah.
That being, I will acknowledge that is definitely, especially in the second act, when you find out that whole second act was for naught because there's a betrayal. I do feel like there's a lot of that, but I think because the characterizations are so strong that it almost in a weird way, Speed Racer becomes like a character study of a nuclear family dealing with grief that it almost supersedes plot for me, that it's like, plot's almost secondary to Speed Racer, not because of visuals, but because this is a family in a time of crisis, and I'm watching a mother and a father deal with the loss of a son while trying to hold on to the one son that they have.
And again, that is the magic of John Goodman and Susan Sarandon in this movie, that like through all of the crazy things on the screen, they keep you tied to that. The fact that like, again, this is people dealing with grief. More so like, because again, like you said, Emile Hirsch's Speed is sort of a passive protagonist. And I think Goodman and Sarandon do a lot of like the heavy lifting in terms of like pushing his arc along and stuff like that. But just the fact that those two can keep you emotionally grounded while just bananas is going on.
Banana sandwich all around
this
movie.
Yeah.
Joe, any final thoughts maybe for someone who's listening to this episode and is either on the fence about watching it or just doesn't get it? Do you have any final...
I think anytime we get a comment on a video that's like, I'm so tired of just talking about superhero movies, or I'm just so tired of that all we ever talk about is blockbusters, or that seems to be all that gets press or momentum, I immediately think of Speed Racer and the fact that it was something no one had ever seen before. It was the fact that no one has ever pulled something like that off before, and that it just got punished for it. And so I always go back to Speed Racer for stuff like that. So I really think if you are just feeling burned out on just IP-driven stuff, it's ironic because it is itself an IP-driven movie. I think give Speed Racer a watch. It's, if nothing else, it's a film school. It's a film school worthy project in terms of visual effects, in terms of letting performance and story lead those effects and not the other way around. And yeah, I think for those, it's just this original piece of art that just died on the vine somewhere between Step Brothers and Iron Man. And yeah, it's worth watching.
Yeah, usually, you look at a box office bomb and you can think of at least a couple things that might have killed it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I truly don't know with this one. I don't think it was marketed incorrectly. I don't think that...
well, people just didn't know what to do with it at the end of the day.
It's one of those things where it's like people didn't even give it a chance to know what to do with it.
Sure.
It was just like, I'm waiting for Dark Knight. I feel like up until July, almost every movie outside of Iron Man suffered from like, yeah, this is good for now. But
yeah,
I feel like Hellboy 2 ended up suffering the most from
Golden Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just give me Dark Knight already. But with Speed Racer, I feel like this is one that I'm actually not as surprised that as the years go on, it gets a little bit more and more of a cult following. I think as we see studios, really scraping the bottom of the barrel to pick up IPs, look, Speed Racer is not one that is instantly familiar to a lot of people. I certainly don't know anyone that's like diehard Speed Racer of the cartoon. This is kind of for me, it's the right way to go about adapting, like you said. Yeah. It's the right way to bring an IP to a new audience. I knew nothing about Speed Racer.
Yeah, I wasn't emotionally attached to it. And so you might as well go nuts. Like to me, it feels like a late 70s, early 80s piece of experimental film. Like if Ralph Bakshi was going to make a live action movie, like this is a weird, like thing he'd attempt to do or something like that. They still make them like this, Billy. Yeah, they still make them.
Even if you can't get into the world, it's worth watching for just like, you're never going to see a movie that's edited like this. You're never going to see cinematography that moves like this.
I think every frame of this movie, like you could hit pause at any point and print that, and it would be a piece of art on your wall.
Awesome, thing to put on your wall. So Speed Racer, I still think is the Wachowski's finest cinema hour.
As someone who saw The Matrix 26 times in the movie theater, I agree with you. It is their best movie.
It's great to be on this podcast and have someone say, I agree with you. That is not how the show usually ends. But I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with me at Joe Starr
187 on Twitter.
At Joe Starr 187 on Twitter every day.
Yeah.
Ish day on Screen Junkies Universe, on Screen Junkies News. Still to come. I know a lot of you are just jumping on now because I finally got iTunes and all that fun stuff figured out. If you haven't already, go back and listen to Ant-Man with Hal Rudnick. Batman Forever, broke it down with Ed Greer. Still to come, talking some post-Michael Scott Office with Roth Cornett.
Ooh, that'll be good.
Yeah, talking some X-Men The Last Stand, some Nightmare Before Christmas with Danielle Radford. And I just got Dan Merle to agree to talk Lost World Jurassic Park 2 with me, because I think there's some good Jurassic Park.
Cool. That'll be fun.
That's all coming up for this first season. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, review. I'll see all of you, all you dweebs next week.